This event is made possible by sponsorship of community-minded organizations and the sale of Abita, Jack Daniels, Sonoma Cutrer Wines, Corbel, Tequila Herradura, Finlandia, Pepsi, Aquafina, Bayou Rum, French Market Cold Brew,
Happy birthday. Right on.
All right. Again, thank you for coming to the Satchmo Legacy stage and hanging out with us. And we are kicking as much knowledge to you as we possibly can. We today now will present to you the people that we haven't told them as we start calling the dynamic duo. This is the first appearance of many, thank goodness, of curator of the Armstrong House and a man who has forgotten more about Louis Armstrong than I'm ever going to know, Ricky Riccardi.
Wikipedia.
Yeah. And another person whose knowledge of music is vast and amazing, record producer for the great Mosaic Records, Scott Wenzel. So, and they're going to talk about, it seems, Louis Armstrong and Bert Williams and a little bit of Bilbo Jangles Robinson, correct? All right, give it up for him, y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you, David. Before we get going, thank you in advance to Ricky. You were amazing, going out to the archives there and getting all the good stuff, and for Andy back there, tweaking and doing good stuff, fabulous stuff. Yes, yay, Andy. Your check is it's back in Rye, New York. That's right. Well, if it sounds like I'm going to be reading right from paper and not being extemporaneous, it's because I'm reading from paper. And so there we go. But good afternoon. Once again, thank you all for coming out. This is such a great festival, and glad to see you all here. What I hope to present today is a look at two early inspirations and influences in the entertainment field that made an impression on Louis Armstrong, Bert Williams, and Bilbo Jangles Robinson. My program here is not meant to be offensive or hurtful in its content, but one that is presented as a ways and means to appreciate the historical significance that these two giants, through their genius, touched the young Armstrong and made him fully aware of what he might be able to accomplish musically and theatrically in a world dominated by a white population. Let's begin then with Bert Williams, as we see right there. A stunning shot of him there, profile, as Art Carney would say. Williams was in many ways a tragic figure. He worked in the genre of the blackface minstrel show and made comedy out of the sadness he felt behind the mask, creating hard luck stage characters and songs as well. In terms of the development of African American opportunities in show business, Williams was widely recognized as a pioneer. W.C. Fields once remarked that Williams was the funniest man I ever saw and the saddest man I ever knew. A pivotal figure in the evolution of the American musical, Williams was both Broadway's first African-American star and the nation's first African-American recording star. In vaudeville, and for a decade as lead comedian of the Ziegfeld Follies, he commanded a huge salary, said to be larger than that paid to the President of the United States. National Public Radio's Kevin Whitehead, good friend, who in a review of our Mosaic Records box set of Louis Armstrong on Decca from 1934 to 45, which you can purchase through me or at the Louisiana Music Factory, said, Lewis absorbed a lot of Williams' half-sung, half-spoken delivery, and like fellow Williams fan Fats Waller, Armstrong heard how swing feeling and comic timing flow together. Both are a matter of precisely placed beats, anticipation, and knowing just how long to delay a payoff. Gary Giddens has remarked that Williams passed away in a season when a new generation of black performers who didn't wear burnt cork were ashamed of those who did, began to replace him in the affections of younger audiences. In one of those telling coincidences, Williams died as Louis Armstrong made his way from New Orleans to Chicago. Armstrong greatly admired Williams, but as we'll hear later, he was knocked for loop by Bill Robinson. A life of constant revolution, Bert Williams' life was a wearying one, and one susceptible to unique strains of humiliations and frustrations. In a 1910 article in American Magazine, Booker T. Washington claimed that Williams, quote, has done more for our race than I have. He has smiled his way into people's hearts. However, he was destined to spend his career wearing burnt cork blackface and playing long-standing racial stereotypes. Williams was born Egbert Austin Williams on November the 12th of 1874 in the Bahamas, and by the time he was in his late teens, along with his family, had relocated to California, where he sang in church choirs and minstrel troupes, as well as becoming skilled on banjo and piano. While in one of these minstrel shows, named Martin and Selig's Mastodon Minstrels, he met his future partner, George Walker. As his partner in these shows, Walker was the sharp and happy, well-dressed Dapper Dan of the duo, while Williams was the dull counterpart. In 1895, they were a well-known stage duo that found favor with the white audiences, and their images appeared on sheet music, cigarette ads, postcards, newspapers, and magazines. Coverage of their 1903 command performance of In Dahomey, which you see right there, for England's royal family was followed with rapt attention back home, and in particular, a new dance craze came out of that, one called the Cakewalk, and that swept the nation. Now, in October of 1901, Williams and Walker recorded for the first time, and this was for the Victor Monarch label. It was a year or so before we even have the dog Nipper, the famous RCA Victor Nipper dog, listening to his master's voice as the official logo. These recordings are exceedingly rare, as only about 500 or 1,000 or so were pressed, but we have a copy here. Just a quick side note, when I was a young boy and I was collecting 78s when I was very young, my father came to me out of church and he said, "Oh, Mrs. Matthews, Jean Flagler Matthews, the billionaire from the Matthews estate and the whole business with the railroads, has a bunch of records for you." And they looked like a bunch of 45s. So I was like, all right, whatever. So I get out there, and to my amazement, I get to the car, and there are about, these many of these 7-inch Victor Monarchs from 1900 and 1901, and they weren't 45s. So Sousa's band and Bill Murray and Nat M. Wills, and a bunch of others. Anyway, this is one of them that we're going to listen to now, and it's Bert Williams with All Going Out and Nothing Coming In, with piano by Christopher Henry Hudson Booth, who was a white piano player. One of the first times we have an African-American and a white person on record. So here we go. All Going Out and Nothing Coming In.
All Going Out and Nothing Coming In, sung by Mr. Bert Williams of Williams and Walker. Money is the root of evil everywhere you go. But nobody have any objection to the root now, ain't that so? You know how it feels with money, how it makes you feel at ease. Things look bright all around and your friends dancing as thieves. But oh, when your money is running low and you're clinging to a solitary dime, no one can see why you come in. That am the awful time. Oh, that am the time. Oh, that am the time. Oh, when and it's all going out, and there's nothing coming in, Lord. That am the time when the trouble begins. Your money's getting low. People say I told you so. And you can't buy a penny from any of your kin, and it's all going out, and there's nothing coming in. I've had my
This is 1901. And that's not even the greatest of transfers. You know, you can hear a little tinkling in the back there, but that, you know, it is what it is. But it's a great thing. It's a blues record, you know, really. Great stuff. So when George Walker succumbed to, of all things, syphilis in 1911, it was a great shock to Williams, as he had not only lost a friend, but relied on Walker to take care of the business side, as well as being able to bounce ideas off of him for their routines. Eventually, he wound up realizing that audiences wouldn't settle for anything less than what he had already been doing on stage, and so this became the basis of his stage career with the Ziegfeld Follies, the great Ziegfeld Follies, which we see here. One of his partners on the Ziegfeld stage was the famed comedian Leon Errol, and this was in 1911. It was indeed a groundbreaking move by Ziegfeld by putting a black man and a white man on stage together, especially since Williams' character was usually smarter and wittier than that of Errol's character, with Williams delivering most of the punchlines and generally getting the better of Errol. Though he grudgingly wore blackface on stage, Williams did have some boundaries. He would never perform on record any more of the more vicious racial songs of the period. To illustrate this point, here is Bert Williams with undoubtedly his most famous parody, and one that Louis Armstrong was sure to have known and listened to. The recording is called Nobody, a tune that Williams wrote along with Alex Rogers and first put to wax in 1906. We're going to listen, however, to a remake with Bert Williams, his signature piece, this time on Columbia Records, but from January the 7th of 1913. It is interesting to note how Nobody had continued to be covered by many throughout the years, including a hit version, you may or may not recall, for Decca Records in 1955 by Pearl Bailey, backed by Don Redman's band. And I can even recall in the early 70s watching on NBC the Flip Wilson show, and all of a sudden here comes Flip Wilson doing a tribute to Bert Williams and Nobody. And then later on, Johnny Cash performed it on his ABC program as well. For me, I feel this Nobody by Bert Williams is kind of akin to What Did I Do to Be So Black and Blue? So, Maestro?
When life seems full of clouds and rain, and I am full of nothing and pain, who soothes my thumping, bumping brain? Nobody. When winter comes with snow and sleet, and me with hunger and cold feet, who says here's 25 cents, go ahead and get something to eat? Nobody. But I never done nothing to nobody. I never got nothing from nobody no time. Till I get something from somebody sometime. But I'll never do nothing for nobody no time. When summer comes all cool and clear, and my friends see me drawing near, who says, come in, have some beer? Nobody. When I was in that railroad wreck and thought I'd cashed in my last check, took the engine off my neck. Nothing. I ain't never done nothing to nobody. I ain't never got nothing from nobody no time. Until I get something from somebody sometime. I never do no for nobody no time.
I neglected to find out. It's obviously a Columbia house band. I don't know who the director was, but I'd love to find out who the trombonist was on that. That's a great piece of music. Few motion pictures exist of Williams, but we do have a sample from a two-reeler filmed by Biograph Pictures in 1916, and it's called A Natural Born Gambler. Bert finds himself in jail for gambling, but he still feels the itch to play a hand of poker and does so with imaginary players. This routine originated from the Williams and Walker show called Bandana Land, and it is a classic example of Williams' comic genius of his facial expressions and body language. And it tells he tells it all as he deals out the hand. Here we go as he's getting, the judge is saying, all right, I'll come back here. And he's chilling out. The eyes, he's got like Jackie Gleason eyes, it's great. Or Jackie Gleason had his eyes. Okay, good. He's just getting one. And he likes it when he has to give out 4 cards. There we go. That's good. Look at my hand again. Let's see. How much money do I have here? He's going to bet it all. Yeah, take the money. And that's the end of the Natural Born Gambler. I'm sorry I didn't have, Ricky, you could have played a little piano there with the silent film. That would have been nice. Well, with the generosity, speaking of this man here, of the Armstrong Archives at Queens College in New York, we have, we're going to listen to Lewis, in his own words, speak of the inspiration of Bert Williams on his own career.
Well, it seems though you don't never have much privacy around this joint, but still in all, I'm determined to say a few words about a famous comedian that I have admired all my life. And it's none other than the great Bert. I'm standing here with one of his albums that some youngster gave to Dale Jones. He liked the way Dale imitates Bert so well till he brought him this recording of famous songs of Bert Williams. 4 records in album. Set C, 25. They call them regular collector's item, and I don't blame them. Now, Bert Williams died in 1922. But as long as songs are sung, Bert Williams be remembered as the humble Negro comedian from the British West Indies who taught millions of Americans to laugh and kings to cakewalk. And that ain't no lie. He's the funniest cat. Columbia Records proudly presents an album of 8 songs recorded from the old masters, which Bert Williams made when he was world famous for his homely philosophy and gentle humor. These songs, which he had written to order for himself, reflected and magnified the spirit of the post-war era in American life. What a man. Famous songs of Bert Williams are here, presented for the enduring pleasures of all those who knew him and for the many others who never would have known the characteristic humor of one of America's great comedians except for these Columbia Records. And that's true, because when I first picked up on the great Bert, I was in New Orleans, going up Rapport Street when I heard the record about somebody got to get them cats. And when that cat said, yeah, somebody else, not me, I flipped. Hey, what a man. Now, here's some more. How these records were made. That's what's it. Bert Williams, in a recording session sometime in the early 20s. And there's the big horn, picture of Bert. Oh, my, what a man. I'm just going to write them right on down, one after another. You know, you're saying another word more.
Yeah, I should have prefaced that by saying that the first visual you saw there was when Lewis was putting his own collages on the reel-to-reel tapes. And there it is there. And recording from the 78s, which we just realized we had something that some audio of Armstrong that stated that he picked up a whole bunch of 78s for like $100 of Bert Williams, and that would have been how much in today's? Do you remember? It was like over. He'd spend like over $1,000 in today's money just to pick up Bert Williams 78s, and so that was one. And then the other photo we have was the reissue on Columbia in the probably around 1940. Don't know if George Avakian could have been produced this reissue set of 478s, and you know, Lewis had that, and then that last visual there is from the Columbia Studios, and doing what they did from you know, the beginning of recording until 1926 when electrical recording came into being, and that's to sing through a horn. And Bert Williams, passing away in 1922, never did record with an electrical microphone. We also have from the archives where, and those people behind, that was recorded, of course, that whole thing from Louis' apartment and or house, and there was Lucille in the background and whistling and having fun. So we also have from the archives a rare moment from the Mike Douglas show. This is like Mike Douglas weekend here. The great boy singer from the Kay Kaiser Orchestra made it big on television, and CBS, in fact. And we have a clip. What year is this from? 1970. And Lewis tells a joke on the program that Bert Williams had recorded, and I'm sure he had, along with other 78s, like When the Moonshine Shines on the Moonshine. That was one that Lewis liked a lot. But this is It's called How Fried, and you'll understand it through Lewis telling this old Bert Williams joke.
The Reverend, he called me up one day and he said, you know, you should be a preacher. I said, well, I don't know. It seems though I should do like Bert Williams did one time. And I told him the story about Bert talking about this old fella out in the field, you know. And he said, the devil caught him out there in the field one day and jumped right up in front of him. He said, look here, Sam, do you like eggs? He said, sure I like eggs, man. But when he went away and Sam, oh, didn't the walls of Jericho, the trumpet sound, and a horn like that for 40 years. And one day he's out there and the devil appeared again and
40 years later.
40 years later, he appeared and said, how? He said, fried. What the old in the wall. Beautiful member. So the Reverend said, boy, you should be a preacher. And I went up and walked up and down the pulpit and telling it.
You tried it.
Well, I told him that joke and made them all see it. And the Rev didn't have nothing on me because I let off one and the choir started singing and I went back to my seat and helped them sing and everything.
Did the story go over, the one you told?
They go over there, but give me applause in the church.
Yes, he should have been a preacher. He was a preacher, right? Jeez, of course. Well, to quote Bert Williams on the concept of his stage persona, before we get into Bilbo Jangles Robinson, Bert Williams said, all the jokes in the world are based on a few elemental ideas. Troubles are funny only when you pin them down to one particular individual. And that individual is the fellow who is the goat. Must be the man who is singing the song or telling the story. It wasn't until I could see myself as another person that my sense of humor developed. For I do not believe there is any such thing as innate humor. It has to be developed by hard work, and I have studied it all my life. And yet, and that ends that quote, and yet in a terrible and telling event, after starring with the Ziegfeld Follies for several years, Williams arrived at the theater one evening to find the backstage of the theater empty. A stagehand finally told him that the performers had gotten together and decided to stage a walkout until Ziegfeld raised their salaries. They knew it was important to show the great Ziegfeld a unified front, but they had neglected or forgotten or not bothered to tell Williams what was going on. Despite their recognition of his talent, despite years of performing together, Williams was still and always the outsider. Years later, Williams would almost be unable to tell the story because it was so painful to him. In February 1922, ill with pneumonia that was exacerbated by hypertension and lung problems, Williams collapsed on stage. The audience roared, thinking it was part of the act. After he had been carried backstage to his dressing room, Williams joked that it was a nice way to die. They were laughing when I made my exit. He never performed again. March 4th, at the age of 46, 1922, he died. He was buried in Woodlawn Cemetery in the Bronx after a funeral attended by over 5,000 people. Instead of seeing a man dehumanized by minstrelsy, we should see him for what he truly was, an artist whose genius transcended attempts to degrade it into racial stereotypes. As a tribute to Bert Williams, Lewis recorded 2 Elder Eatmore sermons during his recording contract with Decca. And Williams had waxed these for Columbia. They were sermons, comic sermons in 1919, some 21 years prior to Armstrong's Decca 12-inchers that we see right here. It was of a bumbling, malaprop-ridden clergyman who was out mainly to line his own pockets. Doesn't happen, really, these days. The discs sold more than 185,000 copies, which was remarkable, considering that they came out on these Columbia 12-inchers, which was really reserved for like classical music back then. Although we don't have time to hear either version by Williams or Armstrong, I do highly suggest you pick up the Mosaic set on Armstrong, or check out some of the, I believe there are Bert Williams CDs that I don't think they were made in this country, but at any rate, if you Amazon it, you might be able to find it there. So that is our man Bert Williams. And now we move on to another entertainment genius that influenced and inspired Louis Armstrong, Bill Bojangles Robinson. I must make mention that those who, like myself, grew up in the 1960s and 70s, there is a chance that you thought that Bill Robinson and the Mr. Bojangles that was written and performed by Jerry Jeff Walker were the same. However, it was Walker, while spending time right here in New Orleans, found himself in jail for public drunkenness and was placed in a cell along with a white man who danced. And this was the Bojangles he sings of on that hit record, and Sammy Davis sings. Public drunkenness in New Orleans? Is that? No? Jeez. Oh, strange. Bill Bojangles Robinson claimed he could run backward faster than most men could go forward, and was the most famous of all African-American tap dancers in the 20th century. Dancing upright and swinging, his light and exacting footwork brought tap dancing up on its toes from an earlier flat-footed shuffling style and developed the art of tap dancing into a delicate perfection, all the while chatting and joking with the audience. He was born Luther Robinson in Richmond, Virginia, May 25th of 1878, and as a young boy he acquired the name Bojangles from the word jangler, which means contentious. A founding member of the Negro Actors Guild of America, Robinson became known as the mayor of Harlem in 1933. He performed in vaudeville from 1914 to 1927 without a single season's layoff. Broadway fame came with the all-black revue Blackbirds of 1928, where he made famous Doin' the New Lowdown, which he later recorded on Brunswick, backed by a small group from the Duke Ellington Band in 1929. Other Broadway shows included Brown Buddies, Blackbirds of 1933, All in Fun, and Memphis Bound. The Hot Mikado from 1939 marked Robinson's 61st birthday, and he celebrated that birthday by dancing down Broadway one block for each year. Robinson turned to Hollywood films in the 30s, starting with, I believe it was in Technicolor, unless it was colorized later. I don't know for sure, but the movie was called Dixiana in 1930, which had a predominantly white cast. Then 2 years later was part of the first mostly black film ever made, and that was entitled Harlem is Heaven. Other appearances of Robinson on film included two with Fats Waller, Who Raved for Love, in 1935, and one of his most famous films, which was shot in 1943, and I bet you a whole bunch of you have seen it, Stormy Weather, which also included Cab Calloway and Lena Horne. And then there were the four films where Robinson teamed up with arguably the most popular of child stars and a favorite of my mother to this day, Shirley Temple. Throughout his lifetime, he was a member of many clubs and civic organizations and was an honorary member of police departments in cities across the United States. His participation in benefits is legendary, and it is estimated that he gave away well over $1 million in loans and charities. The musicologist Marshall Stearns, who founded the irreplaceable Institute of Jazz Studies at Rutgers in Newark, New Jersey, once wrote, quote, "To his own people, Robinson became a modern John Henry, who instead of driving steel, laid down iron taps." When Robinson died in 1949, almost 100,000 people turned out to witness the passing of the funeral procession. And did you ever say that you or things were copacetic? Well, that was a term coined by Bojangles. His career unfolded during the days when there were laws about how African-American performers could represent themselves on stage and who they could perform with. But Robinson's talents and the salary he came to command allowed him to openly disregard some of those conventions and therefore helped change these laws. Examples of how Robinson helped change the restrictions on African-American performers, I think, can be presented in three ways. First, he performed solo. Early in his career, Robinson, like other African-Americans performers, had to abide by the so-called two-colored rule of vaudeville. This rule stipulated that African-American performers couldn't appear alone on stage. So, Robinson teamed up with a number of other vaudevillians, black vaudevillians, including one George W. Walker in 1902. Robinson and Cooper became famous for their acts, performing together until 1916. Their act took advantage of Robinson's comic skills at impersonating an automobile, a mosquito, or a trombone, all by using his lips. And we'll hear that later in a clip with Armstrong. Robinson and Cooper were extremely popular, well paid, and their prominence allowed them to perform in traditionally white-only vaudeville venues. Robinson was a staunch professional, but he was also a gambler who possessed a quick temper and carried a gold-plated revolver. An assault charge in 1915 split the act with Cooper, after which Robinson launched his solo career, becoming one of the few African Americans to headline at New York's prestigious Palace Theater. His stair dance, introduced in 1918, was distinguished by its showmanship and sound, each step emitting a different pitch and rhythm. Now we're going to see from the movie Harlem is Heaven, which was filmed in 1932, Bill Robinson performing the famous stair dance. Remember, he is 54 at this point. You know, I didn't tell you this, Ricky, but I tried that, the stair dance, and I walked around like a question mark for 3 weeks. It was horrible. Second point about Bill was when Robinson and Cooper didn't wear, he appeared without blackface, was an important part, whereas Bert Williams had, as well as many others. He continued not to wear blackface in his solo acts later on, and even though it was part of mainstream entertainment well into the mid-20th century, he said no to that, which was very important. Thirdly, Robinson danced with white actors and actresses. As mentioned earlier, he appeared with a number of stars on film, white stars on film, and his partnership with Shirley Temple brought him mainstream fame. The trouble with this is that he always had to assume the role of a loyal, docile servant who took huge amounts of abuse without any resistance. For our next footage of Bojangles, here is a rare outtake from a 1937 film featuring Robinson called Café Metropole. And this is along with dancer Geneva Sawyer. I do not know much about her. If anyone does, let me know. She was a white performer who wore blackface for this clip, and it was eventually deleted because 20th Century Fox felt uncomfortable with having an African-American male and a white woman, although in blackface, on film together. However, the reason for showing this is not only its rarity, but the quality of dancing by both actors. Carmen. Deleted film there from a portion of Café Metropole. There's more that was deleted from that movie as well with Bill Robinson. You can YouTube that up and check it out. So let's hear the mutual and professional love affair that Louis Armstrong and Bill Robinson had for each other. Again, from the Armstrong archives, we have this from Louis's own handwriting. And this is where I'm supposed to go and read. You can see it up there, but maybe not too well. And I'm playing trombone here with this I don't have any glasses. I personally admired Bill Robinson because he was immaculately dressed. You could see the quality in his clothes even from the stage. Stopped every show. He did not wear old raggedy top hat and tails with the pants cut off and black cork. He later goes on to say he was funny from the first time he opened his mouth till he finished. So to me, that's what counted. His material is what counted. I don't think that there will ever be a Bojangles Bill Robinson again. They might try to duplicate him, but I doubt it. May the Lord bless his soul. I am very proud to say that I shared the stage with the great Bill Bojangles Robinson many times for many years. I think we had Paul Kahn mentioned about them at the Strand Theater. Let's see. Since the first time that I ever laid eyes on Bojangles at the Olanges Theater, is that how you pronounce it? Olanges Theater in Chicago in 1922. I had just come up from New Orleans, my hometown, and I was playing second trumpet with King Oliver at the Lincoln Gardens. He had Bill Johnson from the King Oliver Band. He went over to the matinee show one day, and Louis continues, so I could see this man who I had always heard and read about in my early days in New Orleans. And Bojangles came up to every expectations and opinions that I had of him before I saw him in person. I am sitting in my seat in the theater, very anxious to see this man, and sure enough, the great one appeared. And the feeling was mutual. They have that clip there. There's a clipping that states Robinson was adopting Louis Armstrong's great heebie-jeebies for his own act. And then for our last example, let's hear Armstrong talk along with Robinson on the Eddie Newman Show over WOR Radio in New York. The year is 1947. And Ricky, do you have a little introduction to how this all came about with that program, or do you know anything more with?
I think Robinson kind of mentions it.
Sorry to make you stand.
Oh, man. I'm tired. I haven't even started yet. No, Armstrong was supposed to be on the show. Eddie Newman, I think it told you it was WOR. And Bill Robinson was driving around Manhattan with his wife, and he hears this, and he shows up at the studio and basically takes over the show. Louis loving it. He's like Robinson's biggest fan. But this is the opening when Robinson just arrives here.
Hello, Bill Robinson. Now, tell me how you got in here. This is so wonderful. What a surprise.
Well, I'm telling you, I've been staying out all night alone.
How's that?
So tonight, I'm out with my wife, and I'm over to the roof there, having a wonderful time. And somebody mentioned Louis Armstrong. This is his night. So I said to the wife, well, for Louis, we'll stay out 2 nights, and we'll be out together.
That's wonderful. Where is the wife?
She's looking through the glass, and I look at her. You see
Oh,
her?
it's so high.
Looks pretty fat, don't she, Louis? She hang out.
Come on in and talk to your boy here, will you?
She hang out with me. She'd be copacetic. You remember
Oh, come on in with close light.
You remember when we was working together, and I used to imitate you? I used to
Let me hear you imitate Louis.
I used to get a kick out of this guy when he'd get to that last note and say, then you'd say,
Oh, great. So fun.
well, Louis, I'm going to tell you the truth. I worked with a lot of people in my last 63 years on the stage. But you know one of the grandest and the most pleasant, happiest dates I ever had in my life, can you think? And that is when you and I was at the Strand Theater.
Oh, yeah.
You know, the funny thing, I had a piano player called Putney.
Putting it down.
He was great, and we loved the guy. So I rehearsed Putney for the act, and I didn't rehearse Louis, so we had to work all the week. A funny story, so Putney used to drink, so poor fellow, he mustn't talk about it today, but I love him. I says, Putney, I'm going to stop you from drinking. This is on the level.
Yeah.
So I send for a priest, and the priest comes from down to 18th Street. And we're all set in the room, and I have Louis and Marty Falkins, my manager, and the priest looked at Putney. He said, now, I'm going to take a pledge. Now, this is no joke. So here's the dressing room, and it's a bathroom there. So Putney goes in the bathroom to talk with the priest to take a pledge. And he come out, had a little cross, and by the time the preacher got to 18th Street, Putney was next door drunk and couldn't do the show.
That's tremendous.
And here's this is it now, right? Again, on the same Eddie Newman Show. Don't know much else about him. I did a little research a bit, but go ahead.
He's annoying as hell, I'll tell you that. Newman mentions early on that this is not supposed to be a music show. It's supposed to be a talk show, and that if somebody comes on and sings a song, then they have to pay the royalties. So Newman gets very nervous that Louis and Bojangles want to sing a duet, and so he has to keep interrupting them every 8 bars just to make sure it's not a complete song. And it's so annoying, but try to listen through it. And, Armstrong sings beautifully, right in key the whole time. And Bojangles is doing his trombone thing, giving a little obligato. It's the perfect example of their love for each other.
I had to do the same thing when I was at the National Jazz Museum in Harlem, and we were introducing the Bill Savory collection on Mosaic Records, and Lauren Schoenberg kept on telling me, he says, all right, now there might be people out there with phones and stuff like that, so, in the middle of Coleman Hawkins' Body and Soul, just cough or fart or do something or talk, just so that people won't have a clean, crisp record of it. So here we go.
Well, I'm going to stick around a minute. I'm looking for Louis to sing the song. Can't you sing the little song?
Well, he can sing 7 bars at a time. What do you say?
Yeah.
Especially 2 more than that, I can't
You sing, I can't give you anything but love, and I'll give you the business.
All right, let him play the trumpet. But will you stop after every 7 bars? Otherwise, I got to pay you loose.
Well, don't
Well, I got to count them with my finger then.
Well, I'll knock out the bars.
All you
and then
got to do
I'll
is
talk.
then you go out.
Oh, you gonna oh, all right.
Okay, Louis.
I can't give you anything but love.
Well, of course, you see, that would be an instrument. I just talk. Go ahead. That's all. I just got to bring it up with a little
That's
talk.
the only thing I plenty of.
We have plenty of products, all the time.
You know, I heard a fellow sing that song.
Scheme of wild.
What?
Scheme about the
You
products.
should have found
You sure to find what?
Oh, the ALDA.
alphabet,
Yeah.
and I guess
About 307. Newark, New Jersey.
you're looking swell.
You're looking swell in those new nylons and all that.
Diamond bracelet, you was just
Nylon stockings, baby. That's all those 7 bars.
Yes,
Go
you
ahead
always
now.
have
that lucky day, you know, done well.
I wish I had
Hold
some
on.
good food.
I
Lobster.
can't give you things to break.
No.
See, they can't stop.
Oh, so great.
All right. Lewis and Bill Bojangles Robinson. So I thank you. You've been a marvelous audience. And unless you just came in from out of the rain and you wanted to hang out here, it's nice and dry. But nonetheless, no, I thank you for your attention and hope you've enjoyed this look at 2 heroes of the great Armstrong. Thank you. Thank you, Ricky. Thank you, Andy.
Scott Wenzel, Ricky Ricardo, the dynamic duo. Give it up for him, y'all.
There goes my back again.
I'd like to thank Satchmo Summerfest for the Spirit of New Orleans Award.
All right, more hijinks to come. We have Randy Fertel coming up next at 4 o'clock, who's going to talk about the Eagle Saloon and the Eagle Saloon Initiative and the current state of it, which is for those of you who know, as most of you do about this, an incredibly important thing that he's been working on. So stick around for that. That'll be at 4 o'clock, and we'll be right back. Thanks.
Hello, this is Ashland Parker from the Trumpet Mafia. Welcome to the 18th Annual Satchmo Summerfest, presented by Chevron and the Satchmo Legacy Stage. This event is